The regressed, cocooned child is a persona that I use as a refuge. It was developed as, I guess, an escape, as a comfort in pretty much I'd say 10 to 12-year-old, but it feels emotionally about 5 years old. And it's a persona that doesn't lend itself to presentation, because the whole point of it is to block out the world and enter a safe terrain that is familiar. So if I go into that space, I feel probably about 3 years old. I also, see the kind of 10, 11, 12-year-old who's going back into that emotional state. Now, during that time, I read a lot of Enid Blyton. I was in England, so I was just learning to read at age 10. So we had Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, Willard Price, Island of Adventure kind of things. Enid Blyton, this Find Outer series was my favorite. And it's very 5-year-old. And what I mean by that is it's fantasy from the perspective of a child in a very simple, predictable environment. And so the value comes from being able to predict everything. So that's an antidote to helplessness, to uncertainty, to overwhelm. I can predict everything because it's predictable, and it's not overwhelming. It's completely in my control when I read it, and largely in my control what I find in it. Now, and I reread the Enid Blyton books multiple times specifically for that protection. When I was in my 30s, I reread a lot of the Enid Blyton books. And so I would stay home from school, I would stay up at night, I would be tucked into my bed, and there's a part of me from that era that's very careful and meticulous. Because remember, things were more stabilizing than people, which means for the medicine of attunement, meaning every child needs to learn regulation and attunement. Now, people were surprising, shocking, narcissistic, sociopathic, hypocritical. People were a moving target. And most of the most important things to talk about and say were taboo to say, because they're the pink elephant in the room that disrupts the presumed stability of the cult. As soon as you start talking about those pink elephants in the room, the entire house of cards that is a dogmatic cult starts falling apart. Suddenly the parents are not so loving. Suddenly the teachers don't have as much intelligence as some of the kids. Some of them, sometimes suddenly being normal is a terrible idea. Suddenly your family is not necessarily a refuge. It could be a threat. Suddenly your own religion is insane, or the people with these religious values are hypocrites. And so what's left? Getting a job doing something you don't particularly like, by someone who wants you for your money, not because they like you. I mean, it's a pretty shaky leg to build a cult on, and that's what we've done. And we do it with all kinds of bravado. So, these things were not welcome, and so I needed some place where I didn't feel like I would be under attack and under scrutiny, because I did feel the scrutiny of teachers, parents, and parents of friends. Mild fear, a lot of scrutiny. And being clownish was one of the few reprieves from that, but just tuning it out and going into a book. Now, why I like my dog so much is Philip, or Pip-Pip, as I like to call him, is exactly what my 4- and 5-year-old wanted and needed, but didn't have. So Philip doesn't lie. Philip doesn't abandon me. Philip doesn't play cruel jokes at my expense. And very importantly for regulation, like I'll wake up in the morning and Philip will just be tucked into my stomach or my back. And this is absolute heaven. This is, for this part of me, that's what he needs. Everything else, a distant second. Stable, present affection. Someone there, someone who's not going to abandon and leave me there alone. Well, it's remarkable, A, that we haven't grasped the deep need that children have for that, and B, that we've actually diverged from that. 1,000 years ago, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old is more likely to have stable presence with their community and their parents than someone today. Because reading the newspaper, watching TV is not stable presence. There's a real hostility in the addictive media cycle with grown-ups. And if you interrupt the addiction, because every addict is more loyal to their drug than to themselves or the people around them. Every addict is more loyal to adrenaline, to dopamine, to alcohol, to sex, to whatever it is that's giving that alleviation of suffering and that diversion. And a child has to bond and connect and attune with the parent. But if you try and get between a user and their drug, they feel hostile, they feel impatient. And when you need to bond, and you're met with, get out of the way. Shut up. Get out of here. That energy just destroys the need to bond of a 5-year-old, of a 3-year-old. They understand they're not the drug. They understand they're a distant second to the drug. And where do you go to nurse that feeling of deflation, that feeling of hurt, that feeling of shame? I wanted and I needed to connect, but I was met with impatient contempt, with impatient annoyance, and maybe hit, maybe shouted at. Now, this is particularly the case when you've got an addict and, they ask something of the child, like, tell me if this happens, or stop, you should have stopped your sister doing this. And so the child comes in to, hey, Dad, and he doesn't want to hear it. So if you interrupt, you get shouted at. But if you don't interrupt, you should have done this. You should have interrupted me. And so you have all these, these double binds. And it's absolutely miserable to be a small, child and infant in that type of environment. So, so Philip is a comforter. He doesn't judge. He doesn't rush anything. He doesn't push anything. He's just there. And it seems very comforting and healthy that, like at night, Philip will walk around in circles and then he'll lean down and push his back up. And he wants his back up solidly against my back. And then he's content. And he feels anxious if we go somewhere without him, like a 3 or 4-year-old. Don't leave me behind. Don't abandon me. He's happy to see us if we come home. He wants to go anywhere that I go, even if it's uncomfortable. He likes to, when I drive my excavator, it's a loud diesel, rattling machine. Philip wants to sit on the floor of the excavator rather than be left out. Philip is jealous if other dogs are affectionate with me. Philip is sometimes jealous if my wife is affectionate with me. And Philip is very small. And so the parts of me that feel very small and feel scared, overwhelmed, frightened, those parts appreciate how Philip feels. And they're also, we get to be in a small world together and tune out the big things. The big things feel heavy. The big things feel irritating. The big things feel so big. Little things feel comfortable. I like to give Philip a tiny bit of anything on my plate, and he likes to eat it. You give Philip a bit of carrot, he wants to eat it. You give him a bit of a grape, he wants to eat it. If you give him a bit of watermelon, he wants it. So there's a bonding through osmosis or familiarity. And the whole thing is incredibly healing because Philip has a more secure attachment to me than I did with my parents. And that's what he needs, that's what he wants, and that's exactly what he expresses. Now that's what the part of me needs and wants too. It's just that they don't get that need met. And, I think dogs are more intelligent than many people. And many people behave towards dogs more intelligently than they do to each other. When I feel small and helpless, I'd love to be able to wrap my arms around somebody's leg and have them hold me and carry me and delight in my presence. It's just that's considered taboo in the cult. You lose social rank for suggesting something like that. But it's far more fun than being anxious and feeling small and pretending to be grandiose and leading with thoughts, because that's very interesting is the main meme of the cult. The cult doesn't need more interesting things. It needs more secure attachment relationships with each other and with children and caregivers. So this persona emerged, probably around 8. Illness, migraines or nausea provided some of this cocoon, like I just don't want to face the world, so I'll just stay home. Fevers also provide some of this. Fantasy books, and I would say the biggest crisis is that part of me wants to stay there forever, and whether it's a day or a week, then I have to go back into the world, and that's always brings some sense of dread and anxiety coming from this part. And this part tries to rescue me from, just a lot going on in the world.